Hey Thrive Loud fans, wanted to give you a heads up for an upcoming episode on Thrive Loud. This Thursday, October 11th, we are featuring Ben Friedland. Ben serves as vice chairman and co-head of CBRE's Alternative Investment Practice, an industry-specific practice group focused on advising private equity firms, hedge funds, and other alternative investment companies on their real estate strategies across the globe. You'll learn how Ben and his team provide advisory services to firms in the alternative investment sector on real estate needs within their investment portfolio. We have a lot of listeners in the investment world that will truly value this conversation with Ben. It's a great interview, and listeners will get to learn from one of the top producers and experts in commercial real estate. So make sure to listen in this upcoming Thursday, October 11th, as I sit down and chat with Ben Friedland on Thrive Loud.
Today on Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond.
I have found that the ways that we use to win trials, asking questions, overcoming objections, knowing when to settle, all of those things can be applied throughout life, in the boardroom, the bedroom, the living room, in sales, all of that stuff.
Get ready to Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. I'm your host, Lou Diamond, and today on Thrive Loud, we have an award-winning medical practice trial attorney, a consultant, an international keynote speaker, and an anchor at lawandcrime.com, recognized as one of the top trial lawyers in the country. She incorporates her psychology degree, her training as a mediator, and her experience in the courtroom to guide clients to victory in their life's trials. She's also the author of The Elegant Warrior, How to Win Life's Trials Without Losing Yourself. I lose myself every day, so this is going to be a great conversation. Thrive Loud fans, Heather Hansen. Heather, how are you today?
I am great, Lou. So happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you as well. We met recently in New York City. I found you to be energizing because you have your game face on all day long, and you've got all this, you're bringing together the whole myriad of everything I just read in the bio. However, I think it would be a lot more interesting for our Thrive Loud listeners for them to hear your journey on how you do all these great things together. And I think I'll interject appropriately. That sound like a good way to kick things off?
It sounds fabulous, and I'm happy to do it, especially because I know that the Thrive Loud listeners are all about connections, and that's really been my vocation. I have been trying medical malpractice cases representing doctors and hospitals for over 20 years. And in that role, I've had to connect with the doctors as clients in their most vulnerable state, also with judges, with opposing counsel, with the injured patient who sometimes is catastrophically injured, and with juries. Building those connections takes a whole bunch of skills, some of which I take from my psychology degree, some of which I take from my mediation training, and some of which I take from my natural inclination to study these things. And I have found that the ways that we use to win trials, asking questions, overcoming objections, knowing when to settle, all of those things can be applied throughout life, in the boardroom, the bedroom, the living room, in sales, all of that stuff. So I've found a way to do that. And I'm doing that with speaking, consulting, and in my book, which comes out next year.
So I want to dive in a little bit here into the medical malpractice. First of all, just curiosity.
Yeah.
Are you more often representing the doctors or the patients?
Always the doctors, because once you've done that for as long as I have, it's really hard to sort of switch sides, especially if you're staying in the same jurisdiction. So for these 20 years, I have defended doctors in hospitals in all kinds of sometimes catastrophic medical malpractice cases.
I want to ask this question because this is always hard. Have you ever been in a situation where you were defending a doctor and they were completely at fault and you were able to get them off?
Well, yeah. So the interesting thing is, doctors get up every day and all they want to do is help people. But sometimes there are situations where bad things happen. And I don't know, it's hard to say whether or not they were completely at fault. I have certainly represented doctors where the injury to the patient has been catastrophic, and yet we've still won because the medicine is strong. But it's difficult because it's far easier for juries to find some sympathy for an injured patient than for a doctor. So it's definitely a hard job. And one of the main things to your question that I have to do is really be honed in on maintaining credibility every step of the way.
Okay, so I can totally see the ability to balance and connect all these pieces together is challenging, has probably put you in a position of really balancing out a lot of the lessons that you've seen from all your experiences there. Talk to the Thrive Loud fans a little bit about how you put this into a message, and what are some of the key takeaways that really will help the listeners, and I know soon to be your future readers, about what your messages are all about.
Well, it's fascinating, Lou, because if you think about it, what I do at trial is sell my case to the jury. And I do that by asking questions and overcoming objections, just as every salesperson has to ask questions and overcome objections in order to make a sale. So I have started giving more and more talks to the doctors, and not just the doctors, but to, for example, the call centers at the offices where the doctors work, to work with those individuals at the call centers to help them to communicate well, to maintain credibility in sometimes really stressful situations. And that then expanded to working with call centers across the United States in retail. At the same way, I've also worked really closely with a lot of high-powered females, because a lot of times females have a difficult time knowing when to object, how to object, and how to overcome objections. So taking the lessons from the courtroom and also stories from the courtroom, because I've listened to your show for a long time, and I know you often talk about how stories are such a great way to communicate ideas. So my stories from the courtroom are really effective in helping people in sales and women and call centers and leaders to see a road through which they can achieve wins, whatever a win looks like to them.
So now I'm going to put the natural segue here as I'm smiling ear to ear. Tell me about the wins in the bedroom.
Well, that's usually a negotiation, right? There's all kinds of, in relationships, especially close relationships, there's a level of vulnerability that you oftentimes do see in the courtroom. My cases can be very emotional, and the relationships between doctors and patients, it's different than almost any other kind of trial other than maybe divorce law. And so honing in on those vulnerabilities and how to communicate your way through them certainly can apply in the bedroom and in almost every part of our lives. So I do definitely in the book talk about ways that we can use skills from the courtroom to resolve conflict in our personal lives as well.
So not using the bedroom as an example, but using some of these life's trials that you've gone through, is there a certain communication tactic or takeaway that you teach? One that you can use as an example here, so the Thrive Loud community can get like a feel, as a little bit of a feeler of what your solutions or suggestions are.
Absolutely. I'll give you one example that just came up recently. I stress to my clients the importance of using their differences, because we all have our, unique idiosyncrasies that make us stronger. So in my last trial, the patient's attorney was a middle-aged male. His client was a middle-aged male. There were 3 other doctors named in the case, all middle-aged males. Their attorneys were all middle-aged males. And I was the only woman. And it was a very complicated medical case. And the jury, at least 2 of them, were dozing off at times. And yet every time I stood to speak, they would wake up, not because of my message was that much stronger, though I'd like to think it was, but more because I sounded different. And so whether I'm talking to women or to any sort of person who has to present themselves, we talk about the way that you can use your differences as a strength rather than a weakness. So that's one example where a story from the courtroom is really helpful for a lot of people to see that the things that they may be the most reluctant to show can actually lead them to a win.
Okay, so we're going to play a little fact or fiction question here, because I was just thinking about this. Are you familiar with the television show Bull on CBS?
I am, and I recently did a webinar with someone who has a job similar to Bull's job.
Okay, so the fact or fiction question, this type of profession does exist out there, does it not?
Absolutely.
I don't know if they have the level of technology where they're able to decode what juries are doing, that type of information for someone like yourself as a trial attorney must be very helpful. But I would also imagine in these coach-like skills that you've picked up throughout the years, you probably have a sixth sense of being able to read juries as well. Can you talk a little bit about this? Not the validity of the TV show, even though I do happen to like the actor and the show as well. It's a good TV show.
It is a good TV show. There's not a lot based in reality, but I do know that we pick people for our juries at the beginning of the trial. And the skills that we use to pick people for our juries are also the skills that you could use to pick a babysitter, someone to date, someone to hire, someone that you're going to work for. And a lot of those skills are things like tone of voice. So we know, for example, that your tone of voice tells more about your emotion, Lou, than all of the other senses combined. So if I am talking to you right now, I can read more from listening to your tone than I would be able to if we were face to face, because it's difficult to hide your emotion in the tone of voice. And that's really important when it comes to empathy. And it's also really important when it comes to trials. When my clients are speaking on the stand, you want to make sure that they're cognizant of what their tone is saying about them. In the same way, there's so much about body language. I mean, we could go on forever about that. The use of hands, for example, and you'll find this interesting. Vanessa Van Edwards wrote a book called Captivate, and she talked about some TED Talks on leadership are viewed millions of times, and other TED Talks on leadership are only viewed hundreds of times. And she studied some of the differences and found that one of the key differences is the ones that are viewed millions of times have almost double the amount of hand motions. People like to see your hands. So here's a funny story. I actually made the mistake of telling that to one of my clients right before he went on the stand.
And he was conducting an orchestra, I can imagine, up and down.
Oh, he was banging the microphone. He was really all over the gestures. But it does make a difference because our lizard brain, our survival instincts want to see hands because that means that you're not hiding a weapon. So all of these skills are skills that I've learned over 20 years of picking juries and preparing witnesses and cross-examining that are really applicable in everyday life.
Let's talk a little bit about maybe mistakes you've made in this area, right? Obviously, sometimes the way we thrive and become so successful are through learned lessons of errors that we've had. Think of an issue maybe when you selected the wrong juror or maybe misread an audience, a witness, anything that comes to mind that was something that you used as a lesson.
Absolutely, something jumps to mind, and that's the curse of knowledge. And you've probably talked about the curse of knowledge on your show before, but I could do it for you right now. What am I humming?
What is that?
It's We Are the Champions.
We Are the Champions, my friend. Yes. Okay. That was Queen. I literally was like, We Will Rock You. I was like, boom, boom.
You're close.
Boom, boom. Yes. I was one song off. Right.
But the thing is, I know the song. So for me, it's really frustrating that you don't get it. And in my trials, I know the medicine because I've been studying it with the doctor for 2 years by the time we get to trial. And a mistake I made in my younger days was not knowing how to overcome that curse of knowledge and be able to communicate to the jury in words and ways that they understood. And that is a really bad mistake. And it's a bad mistake in business. It's a bad mistake in our personal lives. And it's a really bad mistake at trial. Once you learn to overcome that curse of knowledge, your effectiveness as a communicator just shoots through the roof.
It's really funny that you mentioned that because we had a discussion. I was on a panel of fellow podcasters and radio hosts, and the ability to practice your craft in a podcasting environment where listening is so important to the listener. So you have to be very clear in what you communicate and to assume certain things. So for instance, if we were in a room together and people were doing funny things that nobody can see but only observe, and being able to communicate that message out was vital. And I've transposed that when I describe certain situations, when I'm speaking or whatnot, I have to make sure that I'm very clear as to what people know or not. Don't assume anything and make sure that you lay out the facts so I can completely understand that parallel and, having that familiarity from beforehand and not overestimating that someone else might have that information or not know that information as well.
Yeah, it's vital. I mean, there's one study that shows that if you say a word that the jury doesn't understand, they don't even hear the next 7 words you say because they're trying to process. That's scary if you're a trial attorney and you're missing words. So it's something to be aware of, and definitely a mistake I made when I was younger.
Okay, so obviously you've had a lot of preparation for performance. The amount of research that you'd have to do in medical malpractice to understand your material, to then be able to present in a trial courtroom. And obviously now you have the opportunity to speak in front of an audience, communicating your message in all the ways that you're helping people better understand how to win their life trials. Talk to me about those first times you were just presenting and not really working in a case, and how that experience felt to you as a communicator and a speaker. Because obviously, one, you had one specific job to do. The other was more of a storytelling environment. How did that go for you?
It's so much more fun because the audience wants to be there. I mean, how many?
What do you mean? They don't want to be in court? What are you talking about, Heather? Come on.
It's unfortunate because, it's important. And I always, whenever my clients or different people call me and say, I want to get out of jury duty, I say, if you want a jury of your peers, you'd best serve. But of course, no one wants to sit there for 5 days and listen to me talk. Whereas keynoting, presenting, and I've been fortunate to go to Ireland and Kuwait and do some speeches there, people are excited to hear you. And more than that, Lou, and I know you'll appreciate this because it's similar in podcasting, I don't get to ask the jury questions. I don't get feedback from them until the end. Whereas when I'm speaking to a group, I can interact with them. I can get feedback from them, their eye contact, their body language. Jurors tend to shut down. So there's a lot about presenting when it's not at trial that just brings me to a whole different level that I really enjoy.
So on that performance landscape, I wanted to ask the question, you've had the opportunity to be on television and communicate a lot with, as an expert or as a guide on, as one of the panelists on certain television programs. Talk about that experience and what that was like for you.
It's phenomenal. It's so much fun. And I know that it's made me a better lawyer because on TV, you have to overcome that curse of knowledge that we just talked about, number one. And number two, you have only 2 minutes or so to get your point across, right, which has made me a far more condensed and focused litigator when I'm trying cases in the courtroom. But listen, TV is just pure fun for me. The first time I did it, someone said, this is the most stressful thing you'll ever do. And I said, no. When I have, a case where the doctor has put their occupation and their trust in my hands, that's far more stressful to me. The television is a wonderful opportunity. I've met some phenomenal people and it's been a lot of fun. And I continue to do that. In fact, I think I'm going to do a morning show tomorrow morning and I just enjoy the living heck out of it.
Okay. So of these 3 things that you enjoy, being on these television shows, speaking as a keynote speaker, or winning the case, what is more fun for you?
They all have their draw, but I have seen people have heart attacks in the courtroom, Lou. And I know from studies show that the stress of trial is actually more harmful than the stress of the underlying event. So even a win is sometimes a loss when it's a trial in the courtroom. I really enjoy the keynote speaking and the consulting and the ability to take some of these lessons and help people to use them in their lives so that they can win, or if they're going to lose with dignity and self-respect and elegance. That is my complete vocation, what I'm utterly focused on, and the thing that gives me the most joy.
So even on the days that you're having incredible joy and victory and television success and getting the standing ovations from audiences abounds wherever you might be, all of us have off days. And I know you're a fan of the show, so I love to ask the question, when you have trouble thriving, who or what practice do you seek to get yourself back on the thriving track?
I have 2 things that are going to sound very different, but they're actually quite the same. The number one thing is motion. When we're in trial, when we get stuck, we file a motion and it gets things moving. And I think that action precedes motivation. So if I'm feeling stuck, I will move, whether that means to go out for a quick run, or if it means to get up and change what I'm doing a little bit, read a book as opposed to writing, or call a friend as opposed to trying to write something for a keynote that's just not working. I think that the movement can sometimes create sparks, and so it gets me out of my head. And the other thing that I do to get me out of my head is completely still, and that is to meditate, because it allows me to sort of clear my mind in the same way that motion can sometimes do.
I like the balance. It's a very yin and yang of you. I like the Which is rather ironic because for the Thrive Loud listeners, and you'll see some of this in the podcast show art, you'll note that Double H here, Heather Hansen, has this very well-balanced H charm around her neck. So I find that to be very emblematic and very symbolic.
I like it. Thank you. I love that necklace.
Do me a favor, share with the Thrive Loud community all the places where we can find you and learn more about you, your book, your websites, things coming up. So we can educate. We're going to put it in the notes, but it's much better when it comes from you.
Absolutely. My website is Heather Hansen Presents. It's Hansen with an E-N, presents.com. And there you'll find I do a weekly blog. I have a weekly newsletter. My blog has a video. So I do videos every week. And I offer a lot of webinars for free for people to get some insight on things like, as we just discussed earlier, choosing people, picking people, and some of the skills from jury selection. So that's the best place. I'm on Twitter. I'm Heather Hansen. I'm on Instagram as Heather Hansen, and Facebook, of course.
I like it. I'm going to ask a little side note question before we get to our signature question here on the show. The process of writing a book is a unique one. I went through it. Many of the guests who've been on the show have written a book. Talk to the Thrive Loud community what that experience has been like for someone who is an orator like yourself. To go pensive and kind of put this into words can be challenging. Talk about your experience in putting together The Elegant Warrior.
I've enjoyed it greatly because I like to write. However, it's really solitary, Lou. You know, when we prepare for cases, we have a team and we go into what we call the war room, which is part of the reason why my book is The Elegant Warrior. And we prepare together. And that teamwork is one of the things that I enjoy so much about being a lawyer. And writing a book, you know, Glennon Doyle said something like, you're not going to find the words in the pantry, which is where I find myself wandering to. So it's been definitely a challenge, one that I've really enjoyed. And the editing process, which is what I'm going through right now, is also great fun.
Oh, you were the most upbeat, positive person about that process. I've asked people that question. I was like, oh my God, I want it to end. But on the same sense, I'm sure like you getting to the result, I think for you, yes, you understand the value of the journey that is required to get there. And someone who can balance out this and obviously have patience, not patience with the T-E, but the C-E. But the patience, because we know how long trials can take and the process can take. And I imagine that's prepared you probably even better than you ever would have imagined had you not had that experience in trying to put a book together. Because some people who tend to have a very short fuse and want to see things turn around, this probably worked out pretty well for you.
Yeah, patience is not my strong suit, but it's something that I've had to get better at, because when you ask a question of a witness, you have to wait for the answer and not give it to them. And so this process is a little easier for me to be patient because it's constant feedback, but it is definitely something that you have to be willing to take the time.
Heather Hansen, your all-time favorite movie?
You know, it's A Few Good Men. For two reasons.
Somehow this didn't surprise me, but now let's hear why.
Well, one reason is I went to undergrad in DC and I happened to be in town when they were filming that movie. So one of the key scenes is when Tom Cruise decides he's going to put Nicholson on the stand, and he's following Demi Moore down the street in the rain and tells her, I'm going to put Jessup on the stand. I watched them film that scene and got to meet Demi Moore and Tom Cruise and Rob Reiner. So for that reason, I love it. And then, of course, that scene between Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise, the connections that they make in that scene as lawyer and witness, and the way that Tom Cruise uses that crystal clear dialogue to get Nicholson to finally explode is fabulous lawyering. And it's a good lesson in how to sort of use questions to get to what you want.
Great summation of one of the best courtroom dramas within our time too. My favorite scene is right at the beginning of that, when he's taking a drink of water and he's shaking, knowing full well the implications.
Oh, yeah, I've been there.
Absolutely. The Elegant Warrior, Heather Hansen, thank you so much for coming on Thrive Loud. This was everything I thought it would be. Awesome and very upbeat.
Thank you so much, Lou. It was such a pleasure.
Oh, it's absolutely great. And to all the Thrive Loud listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep thriving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
My job is to make sure that you do your job. So my jurisdiction's pretty much in your face.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. And follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Thrive Loud. Or find us on the web at thriveloud.com.